It's showtime.
It's the pre-party with J. Cal.
We are
building an alliance.
You are tuned into
the absolute top of the mountain, the ultimate professional wrestling.
Alliance-wrestling.com.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the Pre-Party with your boy J Cal. This is a presentation of Alliance-Wrestling.com, your number one source for news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance. Again, my name is J Cal, and this is our safe space. This is where we talk pro wrestling with you. You can join in the conversation at any time by entering your thoughts into that little chat window right there, and you can be a part of the pre-party. Of course, this is a presentation, like I said, of Alliance-Wrestling.com. That's where we post news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance. You should be joining us there if you aren't currently, because, again, we try to post all the news, upcoming events. I heard from a lot of people who lived in the greater Omaha, Nebraska area that they were unaware of that our world's heavyweight champion was going to be. Well, that's an echo, isn't it? They were unaware that the world's heavyweight champion was going to be in Omaha, Nebraska. If they were able to look at the calendar, if they're able to look at the calendar at Alliance-Wrestling.com, they would have known better, guys. And you could too. So make sure you check us out there, here, and everywhere in parts in between. And now I'm having tech issues, so this is cool. Hey Terry, welcome to the podcast, sir. Glad to have you here as I continue to figure out what's going on with my... Well, what is going on here? I think my computer is possessed. I really genuinely do. Anyways, moving right along. I'm having issues right now, so if you guys are chatting in here, I'm not seeing it. So if you think I'm ignoring you, I'm not. Oh, I think it's starting to come up there. I see Wrestling with MMA is in the house. Okay, let's see. Just want to make sure everything is back to where it should be. If you guys like what you see here, which is basically J Cal stumbling over himself trying to figure things out. Willie, welcome to the show. Dave Scooby's in the house. Dave Scooby's the man. Don't you ever forget that. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about was Southern California Wrestling Awards. Now, what that means to you guys all across the coast, not a whole lot. SoCal Uncensored was the definitive website for Southern California professional wrestling dating back to 2001. Now, I know that sounds like not too long ago for some of us, especially someone like me who's been a part of the site on and off since about 2004. But 2001, SoCal Uncensored, it's not just a tag team for AEW. It is one of the definitive news sites for professional wrestling from Southern California. They've been around for a very, very long time and have recognized Wrestlers of the Years and year-end wrestling awards every year via its website, the SoCal Wrestling year-end awards. Now, this year is no different. This year they did have, in 2020 it was such a chaotic time, right? It was such a, I'm sorry guys, I'm a little distracted because my tech is not working the way I would like it to. It was a very strange year for professional wrestling because of the global pandemic. There wasn't as many wrestling shows as there are normally. I mean, we've talked about that at length when it comes to our world's heavyweight champion Nick Aldis, who only defended the title a paltry 5 times in the state of a whole year. Now, again, that was due to a global pandemic, and the places to perform were limited, especially in Southern California, where our stay-at-home orders included no pro wrestling. So promotions like Alternative Wrestling Show or Pro Wrestling Guerrilla really weren't able to have the amount of shows that they typically do. In fact, PWG was basically grounded this year. We didn't have any of Lucha Vavoom. A lot of the wrestling promotions here in Southern California just have been on hiatus. Now, we did have a few shows with Joey Ryan's Bar Wrestling. We had a few promotions actually do some things before the end of the year, and some of them, down in San Diego, where the law was a little bit different, were able to have shows. But ultimately, when it comes to the promotion of the year for California, for Southern California anyways, the United Wrestling Network got the nod. And why that's significant is Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, the United Wrestling Network, Dave Marquez Productions, whatever you want to call it, have been a part of Southern California since the very beginning. And they've been doing these shows, these promotions for, damn near 15 years. Whether it be Championship Wrestling from Hollywood or NWA Pro Wrestling or the Inoki Dojo or what have you. This is the first time in the history of the awards that the United Wrestling Network, that Dave Marquez got the nod. And I think that's pretty cool. Not that it took so long for him to get recognized, but what a year to be recognized when Primetime Live literally featured some of the greatest talents in professional wrestling in the last year. I mean, we saw guys like Davey Boy Smith Jr., we saw Rocky Romero, we saw Mike Bennett, Nick Aldis, we saw, I'm forgetting a bunch of names right now, Priscilla Kelly, Thunder Rosa. This was a real good time for Primetime Live, and the fact that they were getting ready to crown their World Heavyweight Champion, which has been put on hiatus, but eventually, like we said last week, with everything that's coming down the pike for the United Wrestling Network, I'm sure that World Champion will be crowned soon enough. But I thought that was really cool. Really cool to see the efforts of Dave Marquez and his company finally been properly celebrated. And I mean, this is one of a few times that Pro Wrestling Guerrilla didn't win that award. So again, really, really cool to see that. Other things that we should talk about for the year-end awards now. The Rookie of the Year was Ray Romero Jr., who is a product of the Santino Brothers Wrestling Academy. If you guys have been watching this podcast for very long, you hear me talk about that school quite often because that school has generated a lot of the stars we watch in wrestling today. Ring of Honor's Brody King, NXT's Jake Atlas, for a short time MLW's Douglas James. I spaced on the name there for a minute. And a lot of the stars that you see on the United Wrestling Network, Slice Boogie, they've come from that school. Heather Monroe is another name. So again, celebrating the fact that another Santino brother was able to get nominated and voted for Rookie of the Year just shows how credible of a wrestling school that is and how many great talents are coming out of that school. The next person I would like to recognize was the most outstanding wrestler in Southern California. Now, we have a lot of great talents out here, and I mean, I'm not just blowing smoke up your guys' butt because I'm a SoCal guy. There's a ton of talented individuals, but the guy who stuck out more than anybody was Danny Limelight. Limelight not only had his chances to, be in the limelight, if you will, of AEW, but he also was able to get recognized with Primetime Live. He was able to be a part of a lot of these wrestling promotions in Southern California, but most notably winning the United Wrestling Network tag team titles with his boy Papa Esco. Papo Esco. I need to get that right before that guy kills me. Papo Esco, as the Bodega, really kind of set him up for success, but as well as all these matches with Clark Connors, his matches just in general on Primetime Live and in Championship Wrestling from Hollywood and New Japan Strong really set him apart this year, and he did really have some great performances. And then the tag team of the year was the Wolf Zaddies. Now, we saw the Wolf Zaddies twice in action on Primetime Live. We saw them take on the Tribe in a match that just literally ended in a no contest because the two, so much rivalry, so much hatred between the two, just ended up these guys beating the crap out of each other all over the arena and slowly exiting the arena. And then also their second appearance when they had the victory over the Bodega. the Women's Wrestler of the Year, and I'm sure a lot of you guys here will agree with this. Maybe some of you might disagree. And remember, this is for Southern California, not for the world. But Heather Monroe, who has been leading the charge of the United Wrestling Network's women's division, as well as, appearing in Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, she gets the nod. She's had a few appearances again with AEW, and then has been really kind of all over the place. And the, again, Wrestler of the Year, it doesn't happen every year, but this year we also had Danny Limelight again pull through, winning his first ever Wrestler of the Year award for 2020. Now, what we talk about being a down year for wrestling, really, the United Wrestling Network and its stars really did put on some great matches, whether it be in Hollywood and Port Hueneme for the Championship Wrestling from Hollywood television tapings, or the pay-per-views Primetime Live. You can't say it enough about this group, this team, that, especially a guy like Danny Limelight. Danny Limelight came onto this very podcast. He came onto this podcast and he spoke about how he was looking for an abundant lifestyle, how he was going to break through, how he talks so much shit because he has the skills to back it up, and that 2021 is going to be his year. And I think the best way to kick off 2020 is by winning these year-end awards. I really do think that Danny Limelight is going to be a big star in the world of professional wrestling, and we're seeing this right here and right now. But I really thought that was cool. I wanted to talk about that with you guys. I see a lot of your comments, and we'll get into that in just a minute. For example, I see that Wrestling with MMA says that he concurs that Danny had one of the biggest breakouts of 2020, and if not the biggest breakout of 2020. And I it's hard to argue that. I mean, who on a national stage had a better year than Danny Limelight? And he did it in his backyard in Southern California, as well as on the on AEW. And he's already have had bigger matches in AEW, and he's been somewhat of a bigger star in AEW. I mean, he isn't signed yet, but honestly, I think that's just a formality waiting to happen. I see more of your comments. Willie Bowen says he loves Southern California pro wrestling. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty good area for wrestling. I know there's for years and years this was kind of like the area that was ignored, but I think those days are long gone. I think with so many talented wrestlers coming out of this area, and the pipeline just continues, especially with a school like Santino Brothers. You're seeing more and more talent show up, more and more talent get bigger and better, and I really think it's a fun time to be a pro wrestling fan. Even during the pandemic, I think we're seeing more and more good pro wrestling, especially emerging from the Golden State. Willie Bowen brought up Serena Deeb, and again, Serena Deeb has had a hell of a year. I mean, she went from being released by the WWE to becoming the NWA Women's World Champion, and simultaneously being signed to AEW. It's pretty cool. It is really cool. And Terry is asking about Southern California wrestling. Just to be honest, right now, Southern California wrestling is pretty much on hiatus, much like the rest of the world. I mean, there is Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, of course, that you could see on both Fight TV and on YouTube. There are promotions in Southern California. There's SoCal Pro Wrestling. There's Alternative Wrestling Show. There's Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. There is the Santino's Brothers Wrestling Academy. There's Level Up Pro Wrestling. There's a lot of smaller promotions in Southern California. But Terry, I'll work on that for you. I'll see what I can find. But I just thought it was pretty cool to see some of our, the people that were literally on this show. Heather Monroe hasn't been on the show, but a lot of the people who, when we were in Long Beach, we had the Wolf Zaddies walk on by and say what's up to us on the show. So it's just kind of cool to see that some people, friends of the show, really kind of make a big impact on Southern California, and seeing them kind of get their just desserts, I think, is really, really cool. So I did want to talk about that. Let me show you something that just came in the mail today. Only a few people have this, but check out the Alliance Wrestling t-shirt. It's the new design we came up with at the end of the year for 2020. This is available on the merch site at alliance-wrestling.com. If you are interested in buying hats or t-shirts, you can check it out. The hat that I normally wear, I've decided I can no longer wear this hat during podcasts for the reason that it's got a green bill and thus makes me invisible. So, yeah, Wrestling with MMA's got his on. Yeah, and this is, it's still, we haven't changed the pricing. We were going to change the pricing at the end of the year, but I wanted to make it affordable for you guys to help support the brand. Plus, when wrestling does turn back to normal, I can't wait to throw on these wrestling shows and hopefully see you guys wearing that Alliance wrestling t-shirt or the hats. We had a production issue with the hats, so we're getting more of them made up. The ones that I had are not my favorite, so we'll be doing something about that very soon. So this is the part of the show where we're gonna get a little creative. Oh, DKM has the t-shirt. Yeah, I just literally got it in the mail. I hadn't bought mine yet. I was too busy paying off bills for the end of the year, but I did finally get mine, and I'm very happy with the way that it turned out. I think looks really, really good. The original design of that t-shirt was from the old NWA Showcase. The NWA Showcase was the show that came before Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, that was produced by Dave Marquez, that literally featured all of the talent. Not all of the talent, let's be realistic, but some of the majority of the board-controlled champions. I mean, we're talking Phil Shatter, we're talking Apollo, we're talking the Skull Crushers. These are your national champion, your North American champion, your tag team champions. And that show featured a lot of these talents at a time where the NWA really didn't have a large audience. They weren't nationally on television, but they had television on Colors TV. Rob Conway, who would later become World's Heavyweight Champion, literally was a co-host with Dave Marquez. And it was funny, he would host the show, but then you'd see some of his matches during the show. A lot of those matches were taped in Hollywood, California, but some of the matches aired directly from their live events, where they did a lot of their DVD recordings in smaller arenas. So yeah, it's a pretty cool shirt. I do enjoy it. I hope you guys will check that out. So let's see, more stuff to talk about. So last week I tweeted this, and I said, our NWA World's Heavyweight Champion Nick Aldis has said that the NWA Power is coming back in the spring. And I asked the folks out on the Twitterverse, which free agents do you think would make the NWA better? Which free agents would you think the NWA could benefit from being either a part of Shockwave or NWA Power, whichever comes back first? And I was really surprised by some of the names that I saw. Now, like some of these guys I've never even heard of before, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think, in a case of like somebody like Nobi Bryant, many of you have never heard of Nobi Bryant, but gave the champ a heck of a match at the Independent Wrestling Expo back on August 30th. And I was really hoping, or I still am hoping, that he has a part of the show when it returns, hopefully in the springtime. The conservative expectation for our World's Heavyweight Champion, he said that he thought the show would be back by the spring, so we'll see how that happens. I see Terry McDermott mentioning Charlie Haas. Charlie Haas is a former NWA Texas Heavyweight Champion, and had challenged Scrap Iron Adam Pearce for that 10 pounds of gold. In fact, we had Charlie Haas on this podcast many moons ago, me and DK, along with our friend Jaden with the Alliance Guys podcast. We had spoken to him many years ago, and I would absolutely love to see Charlie Haas come back to the NWA. I think under the current situation, he's pretty much an unrestricted free agent. I know he does have responsibilities with SWE Fury, as well as Jack Stane and Tim Storm, but Charlie Haas would be a very good get for the NWA, especially if they put him in a high-profile match, a high-profile spot on the roster. But Willie Bowen. See, you guys, maybe you already saw the list, but yeah, the sons of the Von Erich boys, Ross and Marshall, were both hinted at on that list. And let me just give you some of the names that people came up with, because I was really... So, like I said, some of these names I never heard of, and some of them I'm really excited to see what they could do. Now, there's a Southern Stretching Crew of Hosh Jensen and Aaron James. I've never seen them before, but the photos that I saw, they had a really good look, and it would be interesting to see if they could actually make an impact in the NWA. The Hitman Jake Capone, I think maybe somebody did a favor and plugged him in that equation. Just looking at him from very superficial surface, he doesn't really have that look that I think the NWA is looking for, but I could be mistaken. Copperhead Duke, I don't know a whole lot about him either. The Greek god Papadon is someone I'm very familiar with, and I'm kind of surprised people are still pulling for him to get his shot in the NWA. He is ultimately a guy who can cut a great promo, and I think could certainly be in the mix for the show when it returns. This one caught me off guard. RJ City and David Arquette, I'm assuming as a tag team. Now, I think RJ City is delightful. I think he is a great promo. I think RJ City would be amazing on any show, but, of course, someone has to sign you for you to actually be on television. But he would make either a great manager or both in-ring talent and promo guy. So I think RJ City is one of these guys who I would love to see in the NWA. Although his stature is a little bit smaller, he doesn't really quit that heavyweight size that I know Nick Aldis has mentioned that's what Billy Corgan is looking for. Guys who are more the heavyweights and less of these less of the indie style wrestling guys. So who knows? Another name that came up was Austin Aries. Now, the last time I saw Austin Aries, he was collecting championship belts. He had the TNA Heavyweight Championship, the IPW UK title. I would love to see Austin Aries in the NWA, but again, he doesn't fit the mold that we keep hearing Nick Aldis talk about. He's not a true heavyweight. He's nowhere near being a heavyweight. He's definitely on the smaller size, but in the likes of guys like Ricky Starks and Matt Cross, I think he certainly could find his niche and certainly could be believable in a match with a guy like Nick Aldis. So I'm not saying no way, but I'm saying not sure if it's going to happen. Now, I see some of the names that are coming up on the list. Now, DKM was quick to point out that Ross and Marshall Von Erich have an MLW contract. Absolutely. So they're probably not going to go anywhere. DKM also brings up Moonshine Mantell, who I think, the little bit I've seen of Moonshine Mantell, I think he would make a perfect addition to the show. Certainly brings that southern grit to the show, and I think, he's got a great look. I don't know how great his promos are, but I think he could be a really good addition. I see Dave Scooby just mentioned having a good mix of a few names with some younger unknown talents, Chris Masters and maybe Carlito as some challengers to Aldis, Pope, and Murdoch. Absolutely. In fact, that was another name on this list, is Chris Masters, Chris Adonis, and I think when it returns, no one's telling me anything, guys. I don't have a pipeline to NWA management. I don't have inside sources, but I definitely believe that Mr. Chris Masters is going to be a part of the NWA going forward. Now, Willie's coming up with some names like Brian Cage and Willie Mack, but Willie, these guys are locked up under contract with AEW and Impact, respectively. Willie Mack, who was the NWA National Champion, ended up signing with Impact as soon as he was available to. And Brian Cage, after becoming an Impact World Champion, transitioned to AEW and is still under contract. So I don't think you're going to see him in an NWA ring anytime soon. However, our NWA Women's Champion is signed to AEW, so I guess anything could really happen, but just not very likely. Some more suggestions were Nick Komoroto, and I don't mean to be rude. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's had some matches in AEW. He looks a bit like a caveman, and I think he'd be a perfect fit. I think he'd be a perfect fit into the NWA going forward. Other names were like the women of Mission Pro Wrestling. And I think as long as there's a link with Thunder Rosa and the NWA, I think that is absolutely something that makes a heck of a lot of sense. Some of my favorites, oh man, there were some names that I popped for. The Bodega, obviously. I love the Bodega. We all love the Bodega. They're United Wrestling Network Tag Team Champions. And like we said, Danny Limelight, man, that guy is a house on fire. I think he really makes sense almost anywhere. And Papo Esco, I mean, that guy... At first, I was a little iffy about that guy, but not only can he wrestle, but he's funny, too. I think his promos are pretty good. They've got that gimmick down pat. And if they were to come into the NWA, whether it be as part of the Crockett Cup or full-time tag teams, I mean, why not? Why not? The commitment to the NWA as it was in 2019 was essentially 3 or 4 days a month. So why not come in and do those, 3 or 4 days a month? Dave Scooby says the NWA just needs maybe 10 to 12 base talent with a rotating talent coming in every 2 to 3 tapings. Exactly. And a team like the Bodega, I think you come in, have a few matches, and leave, and it won't be the end of the world if they're gone, and I think it adds value while they're there. Somebody else mentioned Ethan Page, who just left Impact Wrestling. And Ethan Page, I think, makes way too much sense for the NWA. But to be honest, that guy is going somewhere. He's got a rocket strapped to his back. He's too talented not to be signed by AEW or the WWE, or even to a lesser extent, New Japan Pro Wrestling or All Japan Pro Wrestling. Whatever it is, he's a guy that has a ton of upside, and I think he will be signed somewhere big very, very soon. Willie Bowen says Kento Miyahara from All Japan Pro Wrestling, their heavyweight champion. I don't know if Kento Miyahara still has the Triple Crown, but yes, he would be amazing on Power, except for I don't know if that makes sense for All Japan Pro Wrestling and the NWA. I mean, I'm one of those proponents saying that I think a relationship between the two would be very, very beneficial. But until that day happens, it's just kind of us wishful thinking. Traducus says he predicts that the War Kings will come back to the NWA. Crimson and Jack Stane are already in the company, although Crimson has only made sideline appearances. Yes, that's on my list too. Someone did mention Jack Stane and Crimson, and those two are also a very good tag team. They've had their appearances in Impact Wrestling. They're now wrestling in SWE Fury. They've had their matches in Ohio Valley. But ultimately, I think if you can get those guys back in the NWA, they'll be great for the tag team division and certainly bring an era of excellence to the show. I think that would be really, really good. I see Willie Bowen says the Rockness Monsters. Yes, absolutely. DKM mentioned some of these people could make one-off appearances but won't be regulars. Yeah, and I think that's understandable too. Remember, the NWA isn't AEW. They don't have all the money in the world. They're not going to sign every single free agent that becomes available. More names that I saw that I really, really liked was Crowbar. Some of you guys might remember him as Devon Storm. He's a former NWA New Jersey television champion. He cuts a heck of a promo. I think he really would add something to the show in any role, whether it be a wrestler, manager, or even a broadcaster. I think Devon Storm makes so much sense for the NWA. I don't know if it'll happen, but he's certainly a guy I would like to see in there. Paro, who teams with Odin's son in All Japan Pro Wrestling. He was at the NWA 70th anniversary. He was part of the elimination match to crown a new national heavyweight champion, and he's just really good in the ring. Plus, he brings a bit of diversity to the roster. He's one of the very few openly gay pro wrestlers in the United States. And although someone's sexuality has very little to do with their in-ring action, it's just the fact that he's there being a champion for gay rights and everything else, I think, brings some positive light to the NWA. And the fact that he's just a beast, I mean, let's face it, that guy really, on that roster, can be quite devastating. And if is going to be a new Strictly Business, I mean, maybe he's a guy that's riding with Aldis and Camille and Latimer to make that squad very, very tough. More names, the Koloff dynasty. Now, this is one that I really think needs to happen. Now, we saw the Koloff dynasty on Circle Squared. They were supposed to be, before the pandemic really just ravaged the NWA, Circle Squared was supposed to be like they kind of described it as like maybe an American Idol for pro wrestling. That's not really what it was, but it was kind of like you're auditioning to be a part of the roster. And I think that a tag team like the Koloff dynasty really makes a lot of sense, especially if you can get Nikita to bring them to the ring. Again, the commitments for this show is like 3 or 4 days a month. So bringing in someone like the Koloff dynasty, I think, would be really good, and it ties back with the history of the National Wrestling Alliance. And I mean, it doesn't have to be hokey, over-the-top Cold War Russians, just two dudes who are bad and mean and have got Nikita Koloff to do their talking for them. Dave Scooby says he would love to see Pero versus Jack Stane in a major hoss fight. I mean, what could be better, right? What could be better? You guys, if you don't know who Paro is, you got to look him up. Parrow. Go check out his matches. He is a big dude, and what he can do in the ring is pretty vicious. And putting him in the ring with somebody like Jack Stane, I think you're opening up Pandora's box. Some more names that I wanted to get to is I guess the last name on that list was Davey Boy Smith Jr. Now, the last time we saw Davey Boy Smith Jr. in this universe was when he was at the United Wrestling Network taking on, who did he fight in the United Wrestling Network? Was it Mike Bennett? No. I can't for the life of me remember who he wrestled. Oh, he wrestled Slice Boogie, and that was a hell of a match for Slice Boogie, but Davey Boy Smith Jr., I mean, he just looked good. I know he just came out of the MLW as part of the Opera Cup. Am I saying that right? I know that he lost to Loki on his way out, so I mean, he did the time-honored tradition. And again, Davey Boy Smith Jr. should be somewhere, anywhere, really. I mean, he's just too good not to be signed. But my dream for Davey Boy Smith Jr. and Nick Aldis and the NWA is honestly for a main event match to be at the Wembley Stadium with Nick Aldis, a true Englishman, taking on the son of a true Englishman, Davey Boy Smith Jr., for that 10 pounds of gold in Wembley Stadium. I think that literally sells itself. I think the story that you could tell there would be amazing, and I think those are the two guys that make a lot of sense to do that. So I think that would be pretty kick-ass, just my own self. I see some more of your comments. Hey, Jimmy's here. Hey, Jimmy, welcome to the show, pal. You're late. I need you to write your standards and tell me why you were late. But I just think that the roster for the NWA, because there's so many question marks, I took it upon myself to look at the, some of the releases from the WWE. And, Terry also wants to add the Tribe. Yeah, Hawaiian Lion and Navajo Warrior make a ton of sense for the NWA when they desperately need tag teams. I mean, right now you've got Aaron Stevens and JR Kratos as your tag team champions. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying, who is going to challenge for those titles? Now, to Dave Scooby's point, if you've got a list of wrestlers who kind of come in and go as they please, then having a tag team come in and challenge, like maybe the Rock Nest Monsters or maybe the Bodega, would be good. But at some point, you do need to have rivalries build up on the show, and I think if you do sign a tag team like the Tribe or like we said, the War Kings, I think that certainly enhances it. But I came up with a list. It was originally going to be 10, and then I realized there's not enough time to talk about 10 wrestlers, so I cut it down to 5. And really, there's 5 personalities from the WWE that I think just makes so much sense for NWA Power. So this is my list of the top 5 wrestlers released from the WWE that make a lot of sense on NWA Power. Now, the first one is going to be like an A and B. The first tag team that I want to talk about, well, I guess that gives it away. The first personalities from WWE that make so much sense for the NWA would be the Authors of Pain. These two gentlemen, by definition, do not fit the typical personality traits that you're looking for NWA Power. Mostly considering they're not promo guys. They're not going to be out there cutting great promos. You've got one guy who's from Canada, and you got another guy from Albania with mixed ethnicities. Now, from people who remember them from WWE, initially they were championed by Paul Ellering as kind of like a modern day Road Warriors, and I think that is still apt, and I think that still fits, and I think if there's a way to get this tag team over, I know that the NWA could do that. And again, from all accounts, they were a product from the WWE machine. I mean, neither one of them had an extensive background in professional wrestling until they were signed to the WWE development. Sonny Dishna and Jazim Samani never did much as far as promos with the WWE, but as part of that faux shield with Seth Rollins, they were very dominant ass kickers. And I think, again, that's part of what you need for the NWA is to be different. They need to have these, this direction to look after more heavyweights. These guys fit that bill. 6'3", 300 pounds, 6'4", 270 pounds. These are the kind of guys you want on that roster. And I think if you can find them a decent manager, they would be a perfect addition to the show. And I know that Nick Aldis has been on the record saying that he thinks that there will be more managers when the NWA returns. So this would be the perfect pairing of a tag team that desperately needs a manager and a promotion that wants to support that. So I think they would be a great fit. And I think that would make a lot of sense. Next up on my list, coming in at number 4, would be Manny Garcia. Now, for those of you who aren't in the know, that would be No Way Jose. That guy exuded charisma when he was on the NXT roster, and his time in the WWE on the main roster definitely had a lot of charisma, but not a lot of success. He was one of the names to emerge from the CWF Mid-Atlantic, and again, he was signed to the NXT almost based on that charisma alone. A lot of what he brought to that table, again, was just this natural charisma. People wanted to watch him. He was exciting. He wasn't the greatest wrestler in the world, but that confidence and the charisma, I think, will snatch people in. Plus, it adds a little bit more diversity to the roster. There's not a whole lot of guys like him in the NWA, and I think, again, that's important to, make that show a little bit more diverse. And because of his time in the WWE, he's instantly recognizable. Again, the hair, the getup, I think that's going to trigger WWE fans who will see the NWA and be like, hey, I remember that guy. He was in the WWE. Let's see what he can do. Maybe in a rivalry with somebody on the likes of Trevor Murdoch, or maybe in a feud with somebody like Elijah Burke. I really could see that being a igniter for the NWA and that mid-card. Number 3 on my list. Number 3 would be Thea Megan Trinidad, also known as Selena Vega. Now, she can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because not only is she an accomplished wrestler, but she was also a manager for the WWE in her time there. She's a former TNA Knockouts champion, so she could help bolster the women's roster, because right now, let's face it, there's one woman definitely signed to the NWA. That's Thunder Rosa, and then we believe that Serena Deeb will be a part of the show because she is the women's champion, but I don't think she's under roster or under contract. So somebody like Selena Vega, who has a great look, is able to cut promos. She was the manager for Andre Almas in the WWE. In the past, she was the manager for Austin Aries. You know what, guys? I feel dumb because I had all these cool graphics ready to go. Again, the Authors of Pain. I spent a lot of time making these work, and I forgot that they were there. So I apologize. Let me show off. There's your No Way Jose. Ah, man, I need a producer. And then, of course, Selena Vega. Oops, wrong button. Selena Vega. Again, Thea Trinidad. I think, again, she could bring a lot to the roster. She did manage Austin Aries. She did manage Andrade Almas in the WWE. I really think Dave Scooby just read my mind, just right there. Imagine Thea managing AOP. Holy hell. Absolutely. That's kind of what I was thinking. But, you know, far be it from me to tell you what you should think or believe. But I thought she would be a perfect addition to the show in terms of being able to add another qualified, competent wrestler in the ring, but also being able to be the manager, to be the voice. You know, Wrestling with MMA says that she's related to the Amazing Red. I did not know that. So going to number two on my list would be Chris Hero, Cassius Ohno. I know you guys know who Chris Hero is. How can you not know who Chris Hero is? There may not be a more seasoned pro wrestler in the game today like Chris Hero. He's wrestled at a high level since 2001. He's held titles like the WXW World's Heavyweight Championship. That's a title in Germany. He's been the CZW World Heavyweight Champion when that title actually meant something. He was a Pro Wrestling Guerrilla World Champion. He took that title to Australia. He was the Evolve World Champion. And of course, the IWA Mid-South Champion, which was an affiliate of the NWA, by the way. Plus, when he teamed with WWE Cesaro as the Kings of Wrestling, they held multiple tag team championships: Chikara, Ring of Honor, CZW, and more. His tenure with the WWE has been nothing short of disappointing. Chris Hero was great. And Cassius Ohno, if I'm even saying that right, I don't know if I love that gimmick. I don't know if the Knockout Kid is where I'd go with him, but I do know that he's a very qualified, talented professional wrestler, and being in the ring with somebody like Chris Hero makes you a better wrestler. So putting him on the roster really just kind of benefits the whole show. And as far as I can tell, all of these names so far are unsigned. All of these names have not worked elsewhere. They're all just kind of available. So if anyone in the NWA is listening or watching, again, Chris Hero, number 2 on my list, I think really makes that the NWA better. And you could put him in as a threat to Nick Aldis. You could put him as a threat to Trevor Murdoch. You could put him as a threat to Elijah Burke. Or even putting him in a tag team with somebody else, and he instantly becomes a credible challenge to any belt on the roster. So, again, I think this is my list, but this is a list that I'm very happy with and I'm very comfortable with, and I think that for the most part, if you guys are watching this right now, you probably agree. Sorry about that. And then next on my list, number one with a bullet, coming straight to you. No, not the Bullet Club, not anyone from the Bullet Club, but I'm talking about a 3-generation superstar. I'm talking about Joe Henning, better known as Curtis Axel in the WWE. His grandfather was a wrestling legend, teaming in the AWA, winning tag team championships. His dad was Mr. Perfect. Enough said. His dad was Mr. Perfect, the Intercontinental Champion, a former AWA World Heavyweight Champion. A guy who could deliver the goods in the NWA, could deliver the goods for that World Heavyweight title, could deliver the goods anywhere on the roster. I really think Curtis Axel was highly underutilized in the WWE. But again, he was a 3-generation wrestler, and that doesn't mean you're going to be successful, but it means that, being the grandson of Larry the Axe Henning, being the son of Mr. Perfect, I mean, it's in his DNA to be a pro wrestler. And he came up, not through the WWE development, but he came up through Harley Race's World Legion Wrestling. And when he hit the WWE in 2008, they had a lot of expectations for him. He was the FCW World Champion. That's the Florida Championship Wrestling that predated the NXT. And when he came to the roster, he ended up winning the tag titles twice, and he's a former Intercontinental Champion, just like his papa. But again, these credentials mean nothing. He spent 12 years in the WWE developmental system and on the main roster. And he's a guy who has, in my opinion, a ton of unrealized potential. And if he were given the opportunity to step in the ring against somebody like Nick Aldis, you're going to get an old school feel to it for sure. Plus, you're going to have a lot of that, the Harley racisms. That's not a good word. I shouldn't say that. A lot of that Harley race look and feel. It's going to be an old school match. And Nick Aldis, who prides himself on being endorsed by Harley Race and endorsed by Dory Funk Jr., taking on a three-generation wrestler, taking on somebody who his father and grandfather bled pro wrestling. I don't think that there's anybody out there, there's any wrestler out there that has that same kind of historically connection to pro wrestling. And I really do believe that this matchup, if it were to happen, would be great for not only the NWA, but also for Curtis Axel, for Joe Henning. He's a guy who never got his just due in the WWE. It didn't matter what they did with him. Everything kind of fell flat. So personally, I think he would make a great addition to the roster. Now, I'm sorry, guys. I wanted to kind of get through that list. I see there's a lot of great comments in here, and I'll get to them right now. But again, I just think that this is a lot of good talent that's available. These guys were in the WWE a year ago, and had we not experienced the global pandemic, most of them would still probably be on the roster. Willie Bowen mentions Brent Albright, Phil Shatter, Rob Conway, and Matt Riviera. Well, Brent Albright's been retired for the better part of a decade. I don't think you'll see him return to the ring again. Rob Conway recently retired as well, but that doesn't mean he wouldn't. Matt Riviera publicly announced he was retiring, so that's not really going to happen. And then Phil Shatter used to be known as, is known now as Jackson Riker in the WWE, so he's under contract, so I don't think you'll see any of those guys in the NWA. Wrestling with MMA seconds my pleas for Joe Henning. He says yes, a billion times yes, please, Joe Henning in the NWA. Willie Bowen brings up Watts. And, I think Watts from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, the United Wrestling Network, I think that's a foregone conclusion that he will be a part of the NWA. I don't have anything written in front of me. I don't have contracts to look at. But I do believe that Watts is he's destined for it. They wanted to use him when they were still filming with the United Wrestling Network. They put him in a tag team with Elijah Burke, not because, for anything other than he's a qualified wrestler. The match he had with Eli Drake on Primetime Live was a really solid match. They used him in the tag team match. I'm almost 100% sure when the NWA comes back to television that he is a guy that will be a part of that show. Wrestling with MMA says, I don't care if it's just a one-off. I'd love for Joe Henning to do a long program if possible, but I'll settle for a one-off just to get to see him and be able to see him wrestle Nick Aldis for that 10 pounds of gold. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. That's why I made my list. Jimmy from the LB says he misses the bygone days of Kurt Hennig. It's funny because growing up, I was always the fan of the babyface wrestlers, right? Like, I remember if it was the NWA, I was cheering on Dusty, Nikita, Sting, Lex Luger, Barry Windham, until inevitably they all turned heel except for Sting and Dusty Rhodes. But I never got an opportunity to fall in love with the heels until much later in life. So when I'm watching the WWE, I was looking at guys like the Ultimate Warrior or Kerry Von Erich or Rick Martel and Tom Zink. We grew up on WWE more so than the NWA in my house, but so when I see somebody say Mr. Perfect, I think about all those matches that he made Kerry Von Erich look like $1 million, where he made Bret Hart look like $1 million, and he never got his just due in the WWE either. Now they put the IC title on him, and as we've mentioned many times in the past, the Intercontinental Championship has always been more of like a workhorse title, not the most popular title, and certainly that could be expressed when it came to Mr. Perfect. He was certainly a wrestler that was beyond his time and did a great job of making the talents around him look better. Hopefully Joe Henning has that same opportunity to do that in the NWA. Jimmy from the LB says, wait, is Heather Monroe not signed by the NWA? You mentioned Rosa earlier as the only. Yeah, Jimmy, the NWA really doesn't have a full-fledged roster in the way that most wrestling promotions do. In fact, there's like maybe only 3 people still under contract. Thunder Rosa is one of them, along with the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion, Nick Aldis. It recently was announced that he had just been re-signed recently. There was talk that he might even leave the company altogether. So the fact that Thunder Rosa is under contract through 2021, and Nick Aldis has been extended at least a year that we know of, and whoever else is still a part of the roster, that's really it. Guys like James Storm. James Storm is gone. We know that Ricky Starks left. We know famously that Zicky Dice, his contract expired, and he kind of let everyone know what was his plans were. But most of the roster wasn't actually even under contract. That's the way it kind of goes when you're a smaller promotion. Like the NWA has the name attached to the history and the legacy of years gone by. But remember, this isn't Jim Crockett Promotions. This isn't a multi-million-dollar business. This is a startup. Billy Corgan never shied away from the fact that he wasn't going to just dump money into this pro wrestling. He was trying to make a business, so it had to be profitable. So they weren't just going to sign everybody who appeared on the roster. I mean, Scott Steiner never signed when he appeared. Colt Cabana was there for just a short time. Eddie Kingston worked without a contract, along with Homicide. We know that James Storm contract quietly expired back in March. So a lot of those guys who were on the show weren't really under contract. Now, I do believe talents like Trevor Murdoch, Elijah Burke, Serena Deep, J.R. Kratos, and Aaron Stevens have some sort of deal in play that they're technically under an NWA deal, but what that deal is, I have no idea. So that's kind of that. More of your comments. Willie Bowen, Viperous, and Ruby Rays. I mean, again, they could be, they're free to work anywhere they want, Willie. So if they show up in the NWA, I mean, that's just because the NWA was looking at them. We know that recently Elena Black, Priscilla Kelly, and Lacey Ryan all got signed by the WWE, and consequently it was shortly after their appearances on Primetime Live that they made that next step. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. I'm just reading more of your comments. Jimmy was a big IRS fan. Willie Bowen mentioned Mike DiBiase. Again, he's someone that has retired from the business. Terry McDermott says, when I was a kid, Dusty was a bad guy. See, Terry, that's a time and place. I mean, I know you're a little bit older than me, but I only remember Dusty as a babyface. I never saw him wrestle as a heel, except for when he joined the NWO briefly, but I mean, that was more tongue-in-cheek than anything else. And at the time, the NWO was so over that it didn't even feel like he was a bad guy. It just felt like he was going with the flow. Dave Scooby says, some of the wrestlers from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, Memphis could also be used for power tapings. Absolutely. I'm not sure what the relationship is like today between the United Wrestling Network and the NWA, but we know in the past, guys like D-Man Parker, Pretty Peter Avalon, Royce Isaacs had all made their starts in Championship Wrestling from Hollywood before being used on a semi-permanent basis for the NWA, Willie Mack included. So you don't really know what's going to happen going forward. I mean, look, at the end of the day, nobody is under contract. Well, I say that, but let me rephrase that. Nobody on the roster from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood is signed under a lock and key contract. They have probably dates that are guaranteed, but if it comes down to it, if the NWA wants to book Mike Bennett, they don't have to clear it with United Wrestling Network, or they'd have to clear it with Ring of Honor, because I think he has a deal there. But if they want to use Watts, it's not like they have to clear it with anybody. They just say, hey Watts, we want to use you on this date. Hey Heather Monroe, we want to use you on these dates. And it's not like the United Wrestling Network can object. Now, maybe they don't want their talent to appear in the NWA, and they could say, hey, you have to choose one or the other, but they're not under contract. So, man, that was it, man. We just passed an hour, and it felt like a breeze. So we'll go ahead and start wrapping the show up. It was such a great time talking with you guys, talking pro wrestling, talking the NWA, talking United Wrestling Network. I hope you guys enjoy this podcast. Again, this is a presentation of Alliance-Wrestling.com, your number one source for news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance. So go ahead and bookmark that in your phone, right? Go ahead and bookmark that on your web browser, because if you want to know what's going on in the NWA, that's the first place you ought to check. Because if you go to Twitter today, guess what? There's no news and information for the NWA there. If you go to our World Heavyweight Champions page, again, no news and information going on there for the NWA. But if you go to the Alliance blog on social media, anytime there's news and information for the NWA, we post it to the website, and that goes out to all of our social medias. And you can follow us on TikTok. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter. You're watching us on either YouTube or Twitch right now. Keep following us there. You can also listen to the audio portions of these podcasts on Spotify, on Amazon, on Google Play. So if you enjoy what you're watching today, you're enjoying what you're hearing today, please share this content with your friends. We are creating a community here, and this we are a part of that hashtag NWA fan, but this is also the Alliance blog. And, we're here to talk about both the United Wrestling Network and the NWA, and you guys are a part of it. You're all welcome to be a part of it. And if you want to support the show, of course, visit the merch page at Alliance-Wrestling.com. Pick yourself up one of these dope t-shirts that says Alliance Wrestling, because they're the best. And it feels very comfortable. I'm telling you, man. I even feel more handsome in this thing. But, again, I do appreciate you guys checking us out every Tuesday. We'll be back next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel. I do want to say this. This is kind of my new close to the show. I do want you guys to absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and what is essentially your own. That's going to do it for us, guys. Y'all have a good week.